It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Tom Harrison. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm great, Douglas. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here.
Absolutely, thank you.
So you are from Memphis, is that correct?
I was born and raised there. I lived there most of my life. I'm now reside in Georgia, but yes, Memphis has kind of been a major part of my life for sure.
Okay. Interestingly enough, a friend of mine just bought 50 acres in a place called Belzoni, Mississippi. And I had never heard of the place, and I looked it up on the map, and it's not far from Memphis, is it? It's just kind of over the line a bit.
Well, that might be so rural that even Memphians wouldn't know where to go to get there.
Okay. You've never heard of it either?
I've never heard of it before, but hopefully he's happy there.
Well, he hasn't moved yet. He bought it kind of for investment, but he showed me the pictures. It looked beautiful. I can imagine there's a lot of very rural area.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Once you get out of Memphis, and certainly as you head down south of Mississippi, you're gonna see a lot of rural until you get to Jackson.
Yeah. Well, it looked nice. So hopefully I'll get there one of these days. Anyways,
I hope so.
So you're here to promote a book. You've got a book called From Punishment to Peace. It says debut work, so your first book, presumably.
It is.
Yes. Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, originally I had not planned to write the book. I was at a point in my life where my life had changed. Everything had had come to a point where I woke up and said, I've got to look for a better version of who I was or who I am. And so in that search, I reconnected with a family member from Memphis, an uncle. We were same age, uncle, nephew, and we hadn't seen each other in 20 years. And our lives had gone so dramatically different that I wanted to reconnect with him to kind of explore how I ended up not being at a good place after such a long time in my and having a wonderful career in life, at least I thought. And so I reconnected with him, and we just started spending time together. One thing led to another, and I started recording our conversations. And I thought, this is turning out to be a pretty amazing story. Not necessarily about me, but just about the journeys that, in particular, he went through and the abuse that he suffered at his youth, and I suffered as well, but not as bad as he did. And just to see the things that came from those experiences were truly amazing, and I just felt like I had to share them.
Okay, so this is not a biography per se, right?
Well, one would call it a memoir. I'm calling it more a true story. I'm the narrator and one of the two main characters, where my Uncle John is the other main character. There's an antagonist or two in there too, but in the end, it's primarily the experiences that were uncovered during our journeys together, our road trips together, and how we were able to ultimately achieve peace by many attempts in trying to overcome our past.
Okay. Well, we're walking a thin line here because I don't want to give away the story. Because we do want people to buy the book, after all. That's the whole point.
That's the objective, of course.
That's the objective. But by the same token, I want to give people a little bit of a taste of the book, sort of like a movie trailer version of the book, if you will. Okay, so businessman, you said that you had a pretty successful career, or you thought you did. What was your career?
Well, I find it ironic, as I was exploring your site, you had a guest not too long ago named, I think his name is Wade Stone, and he was an investment guy out of California, and I spent 30 some odd years in that profession, and so I've had a pretty blessed career as far as that's concerned, and spent some time in LA as well. So So that's my background, kind of business consulting, investment consulting. I spent most of my career doing that.
Okay, but you weren't particularly happy with it, or you didn't feel fulfilled?
Well, that's where it becomes an interesting journey here. So just to give you a little bit of a path that led up to that level of unhappiness was I grew up to parents that were 16 when I came into the world, and so they weren't prepared to be parents. And I had a loving mother, but a dad who didn't want to be a dad and made it a point to tell his son that almost daily. And so I grew up with a pretty difficult father. And through the lens of kind of looking back in life, it was discovered that he was bipolar, and he was married 6 times.
Wow.
He was a pretty heavy narcissist. So he was a very difficult man and had his troubles. But yet I worshiped the guy. I truly worshiped the guy. And so I wanted to please him even after getting out, finally barely getting into college. I wanted him to say that he was proud of me, and I ultimately never got that. But that put me on the course of once I tasted a little portion of success, I became very hungry for it. And one college degree wasn't enough; it had to be 2. And one credential wasn't enough; it had to be 4. And one good-paying job had to be a better job that sounded more important with more money across the country. And I just kept doing that to the point where I woke up during a period of a very short period of time where I realized that something was wrong. And how it got my attention was that my business partner and I ended up shutting our business down, which means I didn't have an office to go to. My second wife, which I swore growing up I would never only but have one wife. Well, I ended up with 2 wives, but that marriage ended, and so I didn't have a home to go to. And then finally, the objective of my passion, of my almost obsession to try to obtain my father's love. My father, he suddenly passed away. So I had all this happen pretty much at one time, and I realized that after all the success, all the things that I thought I was doing right, ended up leaving me a pretty big hole in my soul. And so I just kind of dropped everything and said, I got to figure this out. And that's really why the story ended up starting the way it did.
How long has this book been out?
It hasn't been published yet. It's coming out in the middle of February.
Oh, okay. Well, let me rephrase that then.
It's going to be released in February.
When did you start writing it?
Now, that's a good question. Now, 10 years ago.
Okay.
Because of the story itself, a lot of it occurred within a fairly short period of time, but then there was a gap when the other character in the book, my uncle, who grew up with a very abusive father, much more so than mine. He was physically and emotionally abusive. He was also sexually abusive to my uncle's older siblings. And he grew up in a horrific upbringing. So he ends up being addicted to drugs and alcohol starting at 13, and spent virtually all of his life in and out of homelessness and in and out of the judicial system at least 4 dozen times. And so the mission for the nephew, me, Tommy, was to reconnect with John and say, hey, let's kind of understand each other. Let's figure out why we ended up the way we ended up. But in the end, it ended up being an amazing story of how Tommy's uncle, the homeless guy who was addicted, ended up teaching some lessons to Tommy, and they both begin the journeys of trying to figure out whether they can find peace in their hearts after so many years especially towards their abusers. So that's basically the root of the story.
You said you and your uncle are the same age?
Yes, and that's an interesting story by itself. And that in the preface of the book, and I will share that, is that the man was a 33-year-old man, father of 4, and husband. He dies in a horrific accident by a drunk driver, and so he ends up dying, leaving 4 kids 14 to 1 years old to kind of figure out how to do life. Well, his widow remarries and ends up having her fifth child, which is John, the uncle's character. And here's the interesting part about this, Douglas, in my opinion, is that if that man hadn't died, then the two characters in the book would never have been born. And so the book starts off with, where's God when something like that happens? And this is an interesting part of the story too. The man had he was a delivery man up in the Appalachian Mountains just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And he had on the sides of his truck, Jesus saves and Christ died for the ungodly. And so the whole book starts with, where's God when a man dies and leaves such tragedy or such just the ashes of the tragedy behind, and yet the two main characters of the book would never have existed if he hadn't died. So it starts off with that dilemma and then kind of moves on from there.
It's interesting. I see something on your...
One more thing. I apologize. Yeah. I truly apologize. So the widow has a child. At the same time, her oldest daughter, which is my mother, Tommy's mother, she ends up having a child at 16. So looping back to the first part of our conversation.
Oh, okay. So that's how you became the same age as your uncle.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
What I started to say was, I see on here that there are something called the 5 R's. Is this
yes,
a theme in the book, or why is this highlighted?
Actually, it's not, and it's funny because it's almost the aftermath of the book when I started to think of the idea. I never really wrote the book to say what would people take away from it. Never really thought about it from that perspective, but until after I kind of put the cover on it, was ready to go. But in thinking about that, I thought, someone asked me that, and I thought, well, I need to really think about that pretty hard. So I came up with what I call the 5 R's. And this is basically what I'm calling the path from where you are, as far as we all walk around with our levels of punishment that something or some people have done to us, and may very well end up, the punished may end up becoming a punisher as life goes on. And so in an attempt to try to break away from that, I've created what I'm calling the 5 R's. The first is, and let me roll back one more thought here. There's a Christian overlay to the book, and part of it really centers around the use of inviting others who have experienced life in some form or another, similar to what we all kind of do, and in this case, the two characters, into conversations, into small group conversations. And so that's where the 4 R's really start. Is the first R is risk. I mean, we have to take a risk. We have to go, I'm willing to bear secrets that I don't want to share, but at the same time, I am caring, and it's producing that hole in my soul. And so you have to kind of decide, make a big decision to say, I need to take the risk to explore this journey. The second is reveal. Be prepared to kind of reveal, again, get kind of deep and dark, if it's dark, to have the strength to share what we are carrying that is a punishment through our lives. Because by sharing, you kind of get it out there and you get people engaged in the potential of helping out, and so helping you deal with it. The third R is receive. Whatever advice that might be coming from anyone, as far as that is concerned, be prepared to explore that. Don't just go into a group of people and just start opening up and without the objective of hoping that there might be a solution that may come from it. So be prepared to receive. The fourth one's probably the more interesting one of all of them, and that's respond. If you're in an environment where there's more than one person that you can sit down and kind of share, well, the other person's probably got some things to share as well. And so exercising the empathy muscle is as much of a healing approach to the reach towards peace as I believe anything is. Not just saying, here, poor me. It's more like, here, what can I do to also help you? And it's an amazing part of the process, in my opinion. And then lastly, it's reconcile. Not necessarily reconcile to the ones that were the wrongdoers to you, but it's the recognition of the wrongdoing that one, me, let's say, did others. Because those that are damaged end up being ones that damage others. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And so reconciliation, once, to your wrongdoers, but also forgiving yourself, to me is and was the finish line to peace, as far as my experience is concerned, as well as to my Uncle John.
One last question, and then we have to wind this down. You reconnected with your uncle. How long had it been since you'd seen him?
2 decades.
Okay, and what?
2 decades.
We've
not seen each other 20 years. In 20 years.
What sort of condition was he in when you reconnected with him?
At that time, he had a roof over his head. He had just gotten off the street. In fact, Douglas, he had been living prior to getting off the street. He was living in kind of inner city Memphis at the time, and he was working at a deer processing plant. He was living inside of a refrigerated trailer, of which half of the trailer was filled with deer parts or deer bodies, as hunters would come in and deliver them and store them there, and he would be in the other side with a worn out sofa to sleep on. And so somehow he got off the street, saved himself enough money to get into subsidized housing, but unfortunately it didn't last very long. And it's kind of another direction of the book, but and a motivator that ultimately allowed him to pursue, for the first time in his life, some form of rehab because he had not spent hardly any time in rehab during his life. And so that's part of the story as well.
So at the time that you reconnected with him, was he still addicted?
Oh, very much so. He had pretty much been in and out of drugs. Well, he'd been mostly on drugs since he was 13.
Wow.
And as I said, he had been 4 dozen plus times through the judicial system, most of which was possession. There were some DUIs, nothing where he beat up on anybody or stole anything. And so he couldn't get off the cycle. He just couldn't do it. And so part of the story is about Tommy's attempt to reach deep into John and say, what can I do to help? It's almost like Tommy said, you know what, I've done a whole life just for myself. This is probably the most important person in my life to say, what can I do to help somebody else? And so that was that's part of the journey as well.
Well, I think on that we're going to wind it down because we've given a good trailer, I think, to the book, and I think that's enticing for people to buy it. You said the book comes out
Thank you, sir.
When?
February the 15th. And it's called From Punishment to Peace, Road Trips to Forgiveness. Okay.
Do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. It is www.frompunishmenttopeace.com.
Okay.
I've got a book trailer, video, and hopefully some really good information for people to be interested in it. And then when it's available, they can reach out to me and buy it through there or through Amazon.
Okay, super. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. And
thank you, Douglas. It's an honor to spend some time with you. I appreciate it, and I hope to get a chance to spend some time with you sometime down the road.
Okay. Take care, Tom.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.